Mishnaic Hebrew is any of the Hebrew dialects found in the Talmud, except for direct quotations from the Hebrew Bible. The dialects can be further subdivided into Mishnaic Hebrew proper, which was a spoken language, and Amoraic Hebrew, which was a literary language only. The Mishnaic Hebrew language or early Rabbinic Hebrew language is one direct ancient descendant of Biblical Hebrew as preserved by the Jews after the Babylonian captivity, indefinitively recorded by Jewish sages in writing the Mishnah and other contemporary documents. It was not used by the Samaritans, who preserved their own dialect, Samaritan Hebrew. A transitional form of the language occurs in the other works of Tannaitic literature dating from the century beginning with the completion of the Mishnah. These include the Halachic Midrashim and the expanded collection of Mishnah-related material known as the Tosefta. The Talmud contains excerpts from these works, as well as further Tannaitic material not attested elsewhere. The generic term for these passages is Baraitot. The dialect of all these works is very similar to Mishnaic Hebrew. Historical occurrence. Mishnaic Hebrew is found primarily from the 1st to the 4th centuries of the Common Era, corresponding to the Roman period after the destruction of the Temple in Jerusalem. Also called Tannaitic Hebrew or early Rabbinic Hebrew, the dialect is represented by the bulk of the Mishnah and the Tosefta within the Talmud, and by some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, notably the Copper Scroll, and the Bar Kokhba letters. But Yaden mentions that it was Bar Kokhba who revived Hebrew language and made Hebrew the official language of the state during Bar Kokhba revolt. Yigal Yaden also noticed the shift from Aramaic to Hebrew during the time of Bar Kokhba revolt. In his book Bar Kokhba, The Rediscovery of the Legendary Hero of the Last Jewish Revolt Against Imperial Rome, Yaden notes, "It is interesting that the earlier documents are written in Aramaic while the later ones are in Hebrew. Possibly the change was made by a special decree of Bar Kokhba, who wanted to restore Hebrew as the official language of the state." In book A Road Map to the Heavens, an anthropological study of hegemony among priests, sages, and laymen, by Sigalat Ben Zion, Yaden remarked, "It seems that this change came as a result of the order that was given by Bar Kokhba, who wanted to revive the Hebrew language and make it the official language of the state. Within a century after the publication of the Mishnah, Mishnaic Hebrew began to fall into disuse as a spoken language. The Babylonian Gemara, as well as the earlier so-called Jerusalem Talmud published between 350 and 400, generally comment on the Mishnah and Baraitot in Aramaic. Nevertheless, Hebrew survived as a liturgical and literary language in the form of later Amoraic Hebrew, which sometimes occurs in the Gemara text. Mishnaic Hebrew developed under the profound influence of spoken Aramaic in all spheres of language, including phonology, morphology, syntax and vocabulary, phonetics. Many of the characteristic features of Mishnaic Hebrew pronunciation may well have been found already in the period of late Biblical Hebrew. A notable characteristic distinguishing it from Biblical Hebrew of the classical period is the spirantization of post-vocalic stops, which it has in common with Aramaic. A new characteristic is that final per meter is often replaced with final n in the Mishnah, but only in agreement morphemes. Perhaps the final nasal consonant in these morphemes was not pronounced, and instead the vowel previous to it was nasalized. Alternatively, the agreement morphemes may have changed under the influence of Aramaic. Also, some surviving manuscripts of the Mishnah confuse guttural consonants, especially in iron. That could be a sign that they were pronounced the same in Mishnaic Hebrew. Grammar. The grammar of Mishnaic Hebrew displays various changes from Biblical Hebrew, of which some appear already in the Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some, but not all, are retained in modern Hebrew. For the expression of possession, Mishnaic Hebrew mostly replaces the biblical Hebrew status constructus with analytic constructions involving of. Missing in Mishnaic Hebrew is the waw consecutive past as expressed using the same form as in modern Hebrew. For example, continuous past is expressed using the present tense of to be, unlike biblical but like modern Hebrew. For example, present is expressed using the same form as in modern Hebrew, i.e., using the participle. For example, future can be expressed using plus infinitive. For example, however, unlike modern Hebrew, but like contemporary Aramaic, the present active participle can also express the future. It mostly replaces the imperfect form in that function. The imperfect form, which is used for the future in modern Hebrew, expresses an imperative, volition or similar meanings in Mishnaic Hebrew. For example, in a sense, one could say that the form pertains to the future in Mishnaic Hebrew as well, but it invariably has a modal aspect in the main clause.